it's possible for people 2,500 years ago to wake up one day and even write a book which suggests don't harm anyone or anything, even a cricket.
Right. Well, that's fine. But the question is, how many converts does Jainism have? Meaning that the point of, if you're going to give a...
Bro, how many converts does Jainism have? That's kind of irrelevant, especially when you're yielding the sword, Ben. When you're out there forcing people through destructive means to convert, that has no... Who cares how many converts? They're not forcing people to convert to their religion. Sam Harris absolutely destroys Ben Shapiro in this discussion/debate, but I have to add my commentary to this debate. Ben Shapiro is a hell of a salesman. The guy will sell you a lemon in a heartbeat, but we're going to have to dissect what happens in this engagement. Atheist Sam Harris, Jewish, I believe Orthodox of some sort, Ben Shapiro. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the kind of root issues that I think people want us to get into, which is going to be all the religion versus atheism and rationality and all the deep stuff that is actually more fun to talk about than politics, in my view.
Yeah,
I agree. I not into the whole politics stuff. Not saying I don't have opinions, but it's just not my shtick.
And I get the pleasure of talking about it with you here because I don't usually have the pleasure of talking about it on a daily basis when I'm covering politics.
Yeah.
So since we get to do this, let's do it. So,
all right, fair warning. Ben, do you know what you're about to do? Do you understand what you... Okay.
Let's talk about where you think morality comes from. So,
the famous, where does morality come from?
In the religious view, obviously, there are certain things that I believe are capable of understanding by any sentient human being. So I don't believe that all human beings in the absence of religion are immoral people who go around murdering their neighbors and raping their sisters. I think that and in fact, this is pretty well embedded in even Judaic philosophy, the idea that there is a sort of natural law theology where you as just a normal person know not to kill people and know not to steal and know to set up courts of law. This is what they call the seven commandments to Noah. But the idea is that anyone can basically discover these things. And there are universals across culture about you're not supposed to murder your brother.
Common sense. I mean, humans evolved to recognize this stuff, right? This is a no-brainer. And many of your Judeo-Christian values, without a doubt, have precedent in the late 3rd millennium BCE with Egypt. We're talking civilizations that have been around for a very, very long time.
But the biblical reading is that to reach a more sophisticated level of morality that leads to a sort of right-based society we see here, you at least need the catalyzing enzyme of a Judeo-Christian religion in order to get here. That
really,
I think, be the most rationalistic argument on behalf of Judeo-Christian values.
Pause. I want to hear what Sam has to say here, but I really, really need to make a comment here. This is an odd argument I hear all the frickin' time. Dude, of course we're going to pick up, ethics and values from cultures that are most close to us that we've been passed down by our ancestors. And they did the same. Christians did not, in a vacuum, pull directly from Jewish ideals. They also were inspired by the philosophers and the ethics of the Greco-Roman world, Greek and Roman world. And if you could find clear, blunt language in the Bible where Moses says, here is the democratic society that I want to set up with its republic, cool. We don't have that. We know without a doubt that we had a Greek democracy in the ancient world and a Roman republic in the ancient world. And sure enough, you have America using the same language as the Greeks and the Romans from the ancient world. They set up this form of government utilizing Greek, Roman, potentially other philosophies and Judeo-Christian ones. So you have a combination of all four, but America is like a modern Rome, if you will. To argue that we have to be dependent on purely Jewish Christian values is to be ignorant of understanding what was going on during the Enlightenment with our founding fathers and their study of this. I mean, let's just be point blank. Thomas Paine, who was the mentor of Thomas Jefferson, said that Christianity was a fable. He was a deist who saw there was only one God that created everything, and then, of course, the laws of nature, etc. But he was not a fan of Christianity, and I hear this stuff all the time from those who are pushing kind of a political / religious agenda, like Ben Shapiro or others even. They're just wrong. They're just not factoring in. And guess what? You can create your own ethical system at any point, drawing from Eastern philosophy, Christian philosophy, Greco-Roman philosophy, Egyptian, etc., and you could come up with your own model that would look great and be a fantastic one to live by. It's just sad that they have this. There's this bit of superiority to our ethical moral values. We are the better ones, and ours is the truer system. You saw this debate between Jews and Romans. I have a book on my shelf back here by Cattell Berthelot, Jews and Their Roman Rivals, where she actually talks about how Jews changed their interpretation of law, their interpretation of ethics and such, and who could become a Jew, somewhere back here, by being inspired by pagan Rome. Not Christian Rome, pagan Rome. They weren't all a bunch of orgy, nonsense, unethical people. That's the lie. That's the myth.
Where's here again?
Here would be a civilization that values individual rights above the values of the collective, that says that people are to be treated, to use the biblical phrase, as made in the image of God, that we should treat individuals as made in the image of God. That does not happen in the absence of a Judeo-Christian value system. That's the religious argument.
Oh, God. So individualism you can find in the ancient Greek and Roman world. There is individualism and there's collectivism. You can find both of these values anywhere and everywhere throughout the ancient world. The fact that you have this unique later, I say later, theological image of God interpretation that they want to look retrospectively apply to the Bible isn't what the original context seems to be intending in Genesis. Being made in the image of God meant they looked like God and may carry the attributes or some of the aspects of God, but that they looked like him. And you know this because the same word is used a few chapters later when it's talking about descendants from Adam, descendants from Seth, descendants of Cain. These kind of characters are made in the same word, image of their parent. But to go further, this idea that equally everyone's made in the image of God, therefore they're supposed to be treated equal. You literally have law codes in your Judeo-Christian, really Jewish scriptures that have, if a bull kills one of your slaves that are owned, you have to pay the owner. You can only pay them. But if a bull kills a free man, then it's life for life. So the owner of the bull is to be put to death. How is that slave trade treated equal to a free man when you could pay money and get off the hook for your bull ended up, killing someone who's a slave versus your bull who kills a free man, which means your life is indebted? These are divine laws. Your God is not holding the slave as valuable as the free man. Within the Bible itself debunks this notion. So later developments, further developments of ethical moral values and negotiating with the text has led you to these kind of views.
Although
that is more of a historical argument.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's a rationalistic argument because the deeply religious argument would be God said so do it, right? But that's not the argument that I think is the most compelling because that only works if you believe in God and if you believe in revelation. So that's not the argument that I tend to make because I don't find it intellectually convincing. It's an argument from authority, which of course is not particularly convincing. So I tend to make the historical argument, which is that history brought us to that the reason we are at this point in history is because without that particular catalyzing enzyme, you don't get what you have here, which is why the West and Western civilization crop up in a Judeo-Christian system, but don't crop up in, for example, Islamic countries, and Islam's been around for 1,000 years. Okay,
I think Ben's a slick dude because he knows Sam's not a fan of Islam. So he makes the point about Islam being this issue, and he's kind of winning over Sam here because Sam's clearly not a fan of what you see with the radicalism within Islam. And so Ben is doing this in a way to debate him, but in a way to also get him to nod in agreement. Yeah, okay, you don't see this in Muslim countries like we do in the West. West literally prioritized secular values as well, Enlightenment values. And this is one of the problems.
So number one, what do you make of that argument? And then I want to get into, so where you think morality comes from.
Right. Well, a few points. One, I'm not convinced by that historical argument. I think you can cherry pick the data either way and come up with a different conclusion. And even if I agreed with it, it wouldn't make the case I think you want to make, because it would be an instance of what's called the genetic fallacy, which is even if we granted that our respect for individual rights, say, came from a Judeo-Christian tradition, it doesn't mean that it can only come from there, or that it even is best gotten from there. And I would say that
okay, and by the way, it doesn't only come from there. You do get this prior to Christianity. There's so much to be said here too on, trial and error over time within Christianity, and then Enlightenment comes along, and then we find out, okay, hold on, there's better ways through reason, rationality, logic, growing empathy, etc., that help us to then go, you know what, we have some of these tools that we've learned from Greco-Roman, we've learned from Judeo-Christian, that we've learned along the way, that allow us to say, this is bad. Let's end slavery. Let's focus on doing better unto others as we want done to ourselves, which, by the way, that's Egyptian, late 3rd millennium Egyptian law codes point this idea of like, hey, do unto others as you want done to yourself. They're already doing the golden rule.
It actually hasn't come principally from there. And there are many ways. So, for instance, you could say that Christianity in particular was in part responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire. Right? So Christianity,
in part, they obviously are in a time where civil war after 50 years, and then you get like this Great Depression. It wasn't in total, but they definitely weren't capable of reviving after such a catastrophic issue.
Undermined the notion that the Roman emperor was a god. It made it harder to recruit true soldiers, and they had to farm it out to mercenaries. And it eroded what you might call traditional Roman values. And then the Western Empire fell, and we ushered in the Dark Ages. And insofar as there was a reboot to civilization at that point, it was largely the result of the learning and the philosophical insight of antiquity.
And if you watch that drumbeat throughout history, it's always when they discover back to the Greek, to the Roman, to a time in which arts and the humanities and the sciences started to be rediscovered. And I think the golden age, even in Islam, was learning about the older Greek writers and thinkers. They were deep. They were already there. And I've even had scholars tell me, Richard Carrier, one who's an ancient historian who wrote a book about the ancient sciences throughout the Greco-Roman world, pointed out that he thinks that we would have already gone through the Industrial Revolution if we didn't get trapped in this religious bubble and stay locked down without developing and advancing what the ancients were already doing.
Being preserved by, of all people, the
Islamic world, right?
So, I think you can have it any way you want looking at history, but it just doesn't get you there in terms of the moral content and in this case, the political or social content coming from the Bible or any other religious text.
So then why here? Meaning, like, why in Judeo-Christian civilization, but not Islamic civilization? Because you mentioned rediscovery of Aristotle and reuse of Aristotle in 10th and 11th centuries was really beginning, in the Islamic world long before Aquinas really repopularized it in the 13th and 14th centuries.
Yeah. Well, one, I think it's, from my point of view, it's impossible to ignore the influence of Islam. I mean, Islam is its own ideology and set of dogmatisms that are inflexible and at odds with the spirit of science in fundamental.
Not necessarily true. Maybe modern versions, but Sam's mistaken. Historically, they had their golden age for a reason. Now the fundamentalists won the war and ended up collapsing their own Enlightenment phase. But it clearly was flexible for Muslims then. They just clearly weren't fundamentalist, it seems.
And despite the fact that there was a brief period where there seemed to be some happy convergence between scientific and mathematical insight and Islam. For the most part, Islam,
yeah, I mean that's true,
has been hostile to a real intellectual life, and in a way that Christianity was hostile even when the scientific worldview was struggling to be born in the 16th century and the 15th century.
Yeah, but even before that, Christianity was hostile to much of the poetry of Homer and stuff. There was a lot of the West clearly that was condemning Western Christianity, was condemning the poets, the Greeks, the demonic writings of those other gods and stuff. Some preserved it, of course, but we've lost so much material because of this. So it's not just Christianity that did this, or Islam. I would imagine almost all of these monotheistic forms were not helpful at the end of the day in terms of building upon. They tried to, if you will, often suppress. The Eastern Church did try to keep alive some of this tradition, but then Islam did come in, and wow, this was very. We're lucky to have a lot of the stuff we even have today.
What we have historically is a real war of ideas, and I mean, just it can be crystallized in the moment where Galileo was shown the instruments of torture and put under house arrest by people who refused to look through his telescope. Right? I mean, so that was the genius of religion paired with the emerging genius of science in that room.
Well, to be fair, I mean, Galileo was originally sponsored by the church, and so is Copernicus. But there's no question there's a backlash from the church to this stuff.
Yes, and the backlash makes sense because there's a intellectual progress on questions of how the cosmos is organized or where it came from or how life began. All of these questions are the scientific answers to which are in zero-sum contest with the doctrines found in the books. Now, it's true that there are religious people, and now even the Pope, who have relaxed their adherence to tradition enough to make room for something like evolution, right? But it is still a problem.
Not a super new idea. I mean, right? Aquinas was talking about this in the 13th century and 14th century. The idea that if it was in science and it was contradicted by the book, then you're misreading the book, right? I mean, that's a pretty old idea.
Yeah, but that is to subvert science rather than the book in Aquinas' case. I mean, Aquinas thought heretics should be put to death, right? His argument for capital punishment for heresy, and Augustine made the same argument. Augustine thought they should be tortured, right? So that those two.
I mean, how do you get to that when your Lord is saying turn the other cheek and go the extra mile and take the cloak off your back and be submissive and take the punishment, take the beating, that kind of thing, to them wielding the sword and them being the torturers? It's crazy.
Great lights of the Catholic Church gave us the Inquisition and gave us more than a century.
I think it's also fair to say that they were rather instrumental in the development of modern science. So the Dark Ages. No. First of all, I think
anyone would have, if they started to use the tools they had learned from previous science thinkers. The Greek and Roman world were already being scientifically minded. It wasn't exclusive to Christianity. It's kind of unfortunate because if Mithraism would have won out, the invincible sun god would have won out at the end of the day, Sol Invictus, and we ended up having that be suppressive of scientific ideas and whatnot. But then eventually, under Sol Invictus, we ended up having the laws and learning, if you will, not the laws, but specifically learning the sciences that we know now. Would we be crediting that this religion is the one reason, or would we be going, hey, I kind of read those people from the past, a lot of those ancient thinkers, that these people who are also, we call Sol Invictus or Christians, they were learning and reading this material. They were developing from prior thinkers and continuing the thought. It's not just due to that. I mean, if we're going to say, well, if it weren't for Judeo-Christian ideals, guess what? We wouldn't have science today. That's bullshit, because Greek and Romans were already doing science and already developing technologies and stuff. And we might as well say, well, their society was capable of doing that. Why didn't that be the case? I mean, it's just, you don't give credit where credit's due. You only want to make yours the one. That's the apologetic here.
Dark Ages are a bit of an exaggeration in terms of the Dark Ages themselves saw a massive growth in technology and architecture, for example. I mean, Gothic cathedrals are built during the Dark Ages, but the scientific world is, well, virtually every major university in the Western world was sponsored by the Catholic Church. And I'm not a great Catholic defender, right? But virtually all major universities were sponsored by the Catholic Church, which saw consonance between science and religion as a reason to actually investigate the natural world.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's backwards. I think the reality is there was everything that was good that was done anywhere at any time prior to, pick your year, was done by some religious person. I mean, there was just nobody else to do the job, right? So you could make the argument that, Catholics built every bridge in Europe until the Protestants came around and they built their half of the bridges. I mean, so there was just no one else to do the job.
Yeah, and then before that, Romans built bridges. Whoop-de-doo.
And we're human beings who want to pursue various ends, many of which require breakthroughs in learning. So, engineering got born in a religious context. Physics was, the first physicists were people who were Christians, who were, as is often pointed out, Newton spent half his time worrying about biblical prophecy. Now, I think that was an objective waste of his time. He also spent a lot of his time worrying about astrology, right? So you're trying to
alchemy,
yes, and alchemy, and alchemy, insofar as there was anything to it, apart from sort of the internal myth making that may be of use to some people, edged into chemistry, right? So there's
this is something that if you're interested in a really cool book, The Golden Bow, or Bow, however you pronounce that, by Sir James George Frazer, which is an old book, over 100 years old, or roughly 100 years old. The final version's like 90 years ago. He talks about this idea of magic and how there's this magic. All humans believe magic. And of course, I don't mean David Blaine magic. It's sympathetic magic and other forms. But in that magic, it's like a false science that eventually led us to real science. And so you need stepping stones toward what we are doing today and how we've come to where we are. We're probably doing a lot of things we think are true or the best that aren't. And so it's a false version of what eventually will be perfected or bettered over time.
There was often a real science at the back of a lot of merely mortal confusion where people were trying to work things out. I would argue very much under the shadow of religious commitments that they need not have had and were not actually serving their ultimate ends. And this for me is true in the moral sphere as well, because this is why the Bible, in my view, can't be the real repository of our moral wisdom in any sense, because when you go to read it, you are forced to ignore certain passages or reinterpret them rather aggressively to conform.
Sam is definitely holding Ben's feet to the fire, because I don't think Ben will see the text for what it is. I think Ben is an apologist for his Jewish faith.
To what you now in the 21st century have every reason to believe is good or a direction worth going socially. So, it is just an inconvenient fact that slavery is endorsed in the Bible. It's explicitly endorsed in the Old Testament, and it's certainly not repudiated in the New, right? And Jesus told slaves to serve their masters and to serve their Christian masters especially well. So,
Ben is hanging on, but I really do wonder what's going through his mind here.
There's no place in the Bible where you can get a truly compelling case against slavery, because the creator of the universe clearly expected slavery to be a human institution.
Well, except for abolitionists finding enough inspiration in the Bible to use it as their main text.
But they did that despite what's in the Bible.
Well, I think that is. I mean, I don't want to. This shouldn't sound insulting because it's not meant as an insult. I think that from a religious point of view, that's a simplistic reading of the Bible's role in human affairs, meaning that when any written document is given to any group of people, it has to be given to people in a way that they can understand. It's not that slavery was endorsed by the Bible. It's that slavery is universal among human civilization until modern times.
You're giving this Bible this special. It's a special kind of magisterium. Imagine in 100 years, people read Mein Kampf and they say, actually Hitler didn't mean that. Hitler meant this, and it's actually a good book, and everything in it is actually good. And they justify everything in it to make it mean not the ugly stuff that we see for what it's saying, reinterpret what it means. But yeah, again, Sam's point is, even then, it seems later people against the plain reading of the text that many people have held to for so long have found ways to negotiate and make it mean not that, or found other reasons to go, we need to get rid of this thing. God, we're in the image of God. All of us are made in the image of God. That kind of stuff we're hearing Ben say.
Well, no. There are religions that have different points of view on all these questions, right? So it was possible in the 5th century BC to have a take on ethics with respect to something like slavery, or the killing of combatants or non-combatants, that was quite a bit more modern and ethical and civilized than is found in the Bible. So I mean, you might not like some of their other commitments, but take something like Jainism, right? I mean, Jainism, Gandhi got his nonviolence from Jainism. I mean, Jainism is just, in truth, a religion of peace, unlike Islam, which is the word peace is a euphemism for the word surrender there, or submission. So
yeah, that I do think that is the case. That how do we get everyone to be under this and be at peace? Become us, or else, And a lot of people have had that kind of. You kind of wonder if that's what the historical root of it was in some way, is surrender or else kind of stuff.
It's possible for people 2,500 years ago to wake up one day and even write a book which suggests don't harm anyone or anything, even a cricket.
Right. Well, that's fine. But the question is, how many converts does Jainism have? Meaning that the point of, if you're going to give a...
Bro, how many converts does Jainism have? That's kind of irrelevant, especially when you're yielding the sword, Ben. When you're out there forcing people through destructive means to convert, that has no... Who cares how many converts? They're not forcing people to convert to their religion.
Book over. Let's pretend that you thought that God existed and that you were he. And it was your job to convey to a group of human beings what you think morality should be, understanding that they're going to take that and develop that because we do have this gift of human reason that we use to develop things. And so there's a root text, and then it is developed over time. This is why I think Judaism is particularly kind of unique in this respect, because that's been an ongoing dialectic for literally thousands of years. I mean, there's legitimately thousands of pages of tractates of just people arguing about these particular issues. You would say that the argument should have started from the point of there was no text for them to argue about, and they should have just argued from sort of a priori reason, maybe.
No, I mean, I respect text, but I think the principle of revelation is a problem. But just to back up for a second, I think it's certainly problematic for you as a Jew to argue that the legitimacy or success of religion is best measured by the number of adherents in the year 2018. Right?
No, yeah. Let's use your same argument against you. How many numbers of converts, Jainism versus Judaism? Now, of course, you can pull all the tricks out of the hat. Well, Jews aren't interested in converting non-Jews to Judaism. Some were. At some point in history, it appears that some did. Or at least there was maybe some of this around the Common Era, okay? God-fearers attending synagogues. People potentially are actually going on making proselytes, okay? There may have been active, people going out trying to convert. Well, clearly didn't have a great effect on the earth. Less than 1% of the planet's population is Jewish. And a lot of them make up atheists, so they don't even believe this stuff literally. They're secular. So that doesn't make any sense to me. But let's hear what Sam has to say.
But the point of Judaism also is that it says in the Bible itself that God is going to make, great peoples of all of Abraham's sons, for example. And as Maimonides put it in the Jewish belief, even the growth of Islam and Christianity, which are obviously based on a certain Judaic root. I think Islam less so, because there's an actual rewriting of the Old Testament, and the New Testament not as much. Maimonides suggested that Christianity had basically been brought about as an extension of Judaism, which is the greatest, Christianity is the greatest converting religion in the history of the world.
So let me just count Christians and Muslims as converts to our religion. That's kind of what he's trying to say, in a sense, to gain credit about the amount of people who've come under this particular umbrella. And that would be his argument. At the end of the day, golly, it's kind of interesting how if Jews were really wanting to have Christians, this is one of my problems with the idea that Jews are kind of tricking, or it's a psyop or something like that, in my view, against non-Jews to convert them in some malicious kind of, conspiracy to convert the non-Jew, is that immediately non-Jews are already like diminishing Jews in this religion. They're knocking their being God's chosen people out of the place. It's kind of like 2.0 Judaism. Christianity ends up kicking out Jews, and then eventually Jews become targets of the very thing they supposedly started. It's just an odd thing to think of.
Right. So but it seems so strange to count at the success in terms of numbers of Christianity and Islam, given that the
basic principle. The bottom line is the basic principles.
Ben wouldn't let him finish that because you could see what Sam was doing. Sam was about to be like, "Dude, are you serious? You're kind of counting it toward Jewish, right?"
Judaism. Those have been embraced in a way that the basic principles of Jainism have not across time, and they've shaped civilization.
I missed his cutoff here and what he said. Let's go back just a little.
Success in terms of numbers of Christianity and Islam, given that the
basic principle. The bottom line is the basic principles of Judaism. Those have been embraced in a way that the basic principles of Jainism have not across time, and they've shaped civilizations in a way that is significantly better than the principles of Jainism have shifted.
That's just because the converts, the numbers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have had in the grand scheme of the whole world. Yeah, there's a larger number, so their influence and impact would be greater. But again, it's missing the building blocks behind how Judaism and Christianity developed these ethical outlooks and stuff. If you don't think that Jewish rabbis like Hillel and others were not inspired in some way based on the Epicureans and the Stoics and the Platonists and the various Greek and Roman philosophers of their time, you need a history lesson. So Ben likes to bring in the history stuff. Guess what, Ben? Read some books on this. You'll see what I'm saying. They did not develop this stuff out of nowhere. They're learning from each other. There's so much going on in the exchange of ideas. No one has the monopoly on this, and you're acting as if yours is superior. You have the chosen correct revelation of ethics and morals. Thanks to us, we're better than you. Our ethics are better than you. And you're doing a lot of apologetics to get around the fact that Jainism is like this really purely peaceful religion, more so than the monotheistic one you're coming from.
Did any number of small people, or a small group of people, not small people, obviously.
Well, so again, it's just the fact that you and I could improve the Bible with very little thought, just by taking out, if we just took out the worst passages that have no possible redeemable content this year, or I would argue any other year, right? The Bible's already improved, right? So the fact that we could edit it to anyone's advantage is a problem for the idea that this was written by an omniscient being and not to be superseded by any human effort now or generations from now. And it's a problem not just for the Bible, it's a problem for the Quran. And this notion of revelation is what gets us there. Now, if you're going to treat all books as the product of just human minds, brilliant or not, and every shelf in the bookstore or library has the same status with respect to the merely mortal provenance of these ideas, then it's fine. Then you can pick and choose the best ideas, right? And then you can be slavishly attached to, the Plato's Republic.
Yeah. And
that can be your favorite book. But what Revelation gets you is this notion that no, this isn't just a book, right? This is the product of omniscience on some level. And that time,
or divinity. Omniscience may be too strong of a word, but I like what Sam's saying. Be a cherry picker. Find ethics from, different philosophies. Pick Eastern philosophies, Western philosophies. Find what works, but don't be stuck in one book as this is it, guys, and we need to owe all our debt to this. That's insanity. The Enlightenment and what we saw with the founding of this nation's constitution and stuff in the United States is thanks to more than Judeo-Christian stuff. Greco-Roman, it has to be factored in. And likely other societies that our founding fathers clearly were studied on. I mean, these were some wise people. They were not strictly adherents to only Judeo-Christian worldview.
Ties your hands intellectually, because then you are forced to make these acrobatic contortions around passages which clearly have no good application now and didn't even have a good application then. And when you view it from the other side, when you think about just how good a book would be if an omniscient being wrote it. I mean, that is it's very easy to see what could be in there.
He kind of could see the future. He would know. Hey, one day humans shouldn't own humans. Slavery. Or you name it, right? Women, the way they're treated. There's so much stuff that could be clearly he could have saw it back there. But I did a long documentary on this. There's a guy, Jaco Gericke, Jacogeriche, from South Africa. He wrote his PhD dissertation on proving philosophically Yahweh doesn't exist. And he makes every argument under the sun. It's a really, really fun read if you're into this kind of stuff. And in it, it's more than does he know the future and ethically how we're going to evolve and better ourselves. But it's like the government that God has described in the Bible in heaven is reflective of a government that the earth has. So everything you read in the text is literally only the limitations of the author, the human on earth. That is literally you only get what the human is writing. They are max to their knowledge. You don't have any awareness of germ theory, any future scientific endeavor. This is why you hear Muslims always try to talk about scientific miracles in the Quran.
That would still astonish us. I mean, it's very easy to see what could be in there that would prove, just based on the time of its emergence, that this couldn't have been the product of merely human minds. And there's nothing like that in the Bible.
To respond to some of those points, I think that there was a lot there. So I'm going to try and kind of...
There was a lot there.
Parse it as we go. I think that one of the arguments that is made, certainly in the Talmud, is the idea that human reason was generated in order to help reason through the Bible, basically. That the Bible is not just, here it is, obey it, but it is also a constant conversation between God and man, in the sense that there is a active conversation that goes into the interpretation.
That may be an anachronistic interpretation amongst the rabbis who are debating the meaning of these texts and various traditions amongst Jews. Some say there was an Enochian Judaism around the time the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, meaning there were 5 books of Enoch and 5 books of Moses. And these different Jews were competing for their ideas. So post-war, post-Bar Kokhba, right, 70 AD and 135, 136 AD, you end up having Jews that are trying to make sense of the world without a temple, but also are having to negotiate amongst themselves the meaning and understanding of how to live their life and what is the best understanding of the text. And they're debating, and they've been debating, and they're still debating to this day. But yeah, I get it. You have an ongoing debate with your text, and that's fine. But if you see it as revelation, again, I still see what Sam's saying.
Of these texts. And so what the Bible really is an anchor, and the ship is anchored to the anchor, but there is still some slack in the line, meaning that it is not that you are now tied to this anchor at the bottom of the ocean. There's still a boat that's attached, but right. Human reason is designed in order so that you can wobble through with this anchor attached to you. And if without the anchor, you end up in a land of utopianism. And I think the history of the 19th and 20th century in the Dostoevskian view would be a good example of how that happens. And so the construction of alternate morality that is not based on any Judeo-Christian notions can take you in any number of horrible places that are significantly worse in virtually every way than the places that Judeo-Christian religion brought you for 2,000 years.
Okay, so this is the question I have for some of you smart viewers. And I'd like to hear your take on this. So we saw the chaos that happened, for example, in Russia with some of these godless societies and stuff that seem to have tried to separate themselves from tradition. Is it better, in your view, that we find the Bible or any text, make it mean what it doesn't say about slavery, about, genocide, about whatever, to make the text nice and pretty, even if it doesn't say that, so that we can hold on to an anchor of tradition that has ethics and values and deep-rooted history we claim for our own in-group? Or do we find some other way without needing to anchor, as he described the thing, the boat must be anchored to this anchor into this ancient text? Do we find any progressive values and progressive ethics that we can anchor into something we think is beneficial without going too far, without possibly going beyond what we should be going on? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. What are your thoughts?
My argument is not that Judeo-Christianity itself, the Judaism on its own, is everything that you need, right? As an Orthodox Jew, my argument is not that. My argument, which if it were, then I wouldn't be out there caring about science or about nature, as you say. And people who are fundamentalists don't care about any of those things. They think everything you need to know is found in this particular book. I don't think I know how to fix my car from the Bible.
Right.
But what I do think is that in the Straussian view, there's a tension between Athens and Jerusalem. There's a tension between revelation and reason. And that without either one of these things, that reason without revelation ends up in utopias of our own creation that end up in can end up in horrifying places, ranging from death camps to gulags. And that revelation without reason ends up in theocratic tyranny. And so you do need both of those in an interchange in order to have something that means something. And the reason that omniscience matters is because if there is no belief in an objective level of moral truth, then everything becomes subject to interpretation, up to and including, if you were intellectually honest enough, laws like murder, because maybe murder doesn't apply to people who are outside my tribe. Maybe it doesn't apply to people who are outside my family.
I mean, dude, your own law codes. And this is the problem again. It's like we're all negotiating with this crap. Because in the Bible, thou shalt not murder, right? If you interpret that word in the Ten Commandments as murder. Some say it's thou shalt not kill. Then God gives a command, kill every man, woman, and child. But thou shalt not. But go and do that. And it's like, oh, well, that's not murder. That was justified. God said so. Oh, well, they were not innocent, even though there were children and women who were non-combatants. That's crazy. Think about that. That's crazy. So do we really need revelation from these texts? It's almost like you need to convince the people, though, of this myth of a solid, firm absolutism about morality. And if we just say it's subjective and anyone can interpret it however that we want, you could potentially end up in all sorts of range of, well, that's your truth and not mine, and I do what I want. And there is a sense in which we do that already. Even if they claimed objective morality, humans still behave beyond some of these things. But like, this is above my pay grade, but how do we figure this out? How do we solve this riddle to get humans to stop doing the gulag and in the concentration camps, but yet don't need to try and negotiate with a text that says horrendous things?
There are people I just want to kill for my own benefit. So this is where we get into the alternative moral. So this is where I'm going to ask you about your moral basis. So, let
me respond to some of that, though, because
sure,
there's a lot there. So it's not going to surprise you that I disagree with that summary.
This is the fun part,
So, I mean, to take your anchor, I think there is an anchor, or at least a foundation to everything we can discover or value, and it's human conversation, right? And I think the morality, because I think revelation, it simply didn't happen, right?
Right.
It's just human beings talking to one another at any point in history, thinking internally. I mean, there's been extraordinary people, and they've had extraordinary insights, and they've shared them, and they've codified them in books. So the morality or pseudo-morality or barbaric morality that you find in various places in various texts was put there by people, right? It's not that it came from some other source and that we need to be anchored to it. It is the record of a merely human conversation that I'll be the first to admit has in various parts real value and real wisdom in it, and hence the reason why people are so attached to some of it, certainly. But it's just that's not unique for the Bible. That you can find that among Greek philosophers or various places in antiquity, and you can find it in modern variants. I mean, you and I in one another's presence here having a conversation that gets recorded, we can say something that is highly relevant to the question of how to live a good life. And if we were doing this 3,000 years ago and it happened to get written down, it would be one of the lines that people would think had been revealed if they lost track of what its actual source was.
Yeah, this is a great point. I sincerely appreciate Sam taking the time to describe this. Look, we're going to pick this up where we left off in the next video. What are your thoughts about the discussion so far between Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro? I look forward to seeing the continuation of this dialogue. I do appreciate this back and forth, but I hope that you watching have some things I'm missing that you can add in the comments section. Look, this is a new channel, MythVision Reacts. Hit the bell and subscribe so you're notified each time I drop a new reaction if you're into this kind of stuff. Until next time, see you then.